ladies and gentlemen, we have Spencer, the co-founder and GP at 75, and Sunny. And we have Agosa, managing partner at Echo VC, who are joining us today. It's an honor to have both of you. So I'll start by giving both of you the opportunity to introduce yourselves before we kick off with questions. So I'll start with Spencer, and then we'll pass it off to Agosa to give opening introductions in the work that you do.
Great. Thank you for having me here. I've had a long career in tech. My first startup was a company called Hotwire, which we sold to Expedia. My next startup was a company called Zillow, which I started in 2005 with a great team, and I ran it for almost 15 years. When I retired from Zillow, I started angel investing through 75 and Sunny, and also incubating and starting other companies. And a couple of my current ones are Picasso, which was the fastest company to become a unicorn, a company called Recon Food, which is a food social network, and many others, which I'm sure we'll hit upon at different points in the conversation. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Please feel free to introduce yourself. Welcome.
Great. Thanks a lot. So my name is Agosa Moigui. I am a managing partner of Echo VC. We are seed and early stage technology venture capital fund focused on investing in underrepresented founders and underserved emerging markets. Prior to this, I was at Intel Capital for just under a decade. My claim to fame at Intel Capital was writing an investment thesis and strategy on putting growth checks into some of the best internet companies. And so over a 4 or 5 year period, I brought in all the big names: Facebook, LinkedIn, Pandora, AdMob, Groupon. Couldn't get anybody to invest, couldn't convince them to do it, which of course now looking back was a little bit of a shame. But I left to start Echo VC, and the thesis was to look around the corner and look for very interesting founders doing interesting things that the market discounted or underestimated. We have just under $45 million under management, and continue to do interesting things across borders. So very excited to be here.
Thank you so much for those amazing introductions, and we're gonna dive right in. So one of the things that has been a big proponent about this session is really hearing about your career journey, because I think we talk a lot about the investment landscape of how do entrepreneurs get access to capital, but no one talks about the investors themselves and their journey, how they got on the other side of the table. So I would love to start with Agosa. If you could just share with us, how did you start? What's your investment thesis? And how can someone follow that journey if they want to be able to provide capital to entrepreneurs? How did they get into the line of work that you did? And then we'll pass it over to Spencer. So I'll pass it over to you.
Sure. So I think I'm incredibly grateful for where I sit right now. And when people ask, well, how did you get there? I was like, in a very non-linear way. I started off as a lawyer, and what was also, I think, interesting was that I had external interests, right? So you're sort of, doing all the legal stuff. And, I actually started off as an oil and gas lawyer, to be more bizarre, and then moved into sort of corporate. But, and maybe because my brother is a computer scientist and engineer, we also had shared interests in technology. And so there was that little side hustle where I just kept looking, just sort of keeping abreast of technology. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the trajectories that I hit, in sort of my career have been from external forces that had almost nothing to do with sort of what I did sort of on paper. So for instance, when I was at Intel Capital, I was doing M&A, I was doing VC, I was doing post-merger acquisitions and integration. And then, I started, looking around and taking, sort of feedback from my environment. This was, first of all, when the sort of the NASDAQ crash post 2000. And so one of the ideas I had was, wait a minute, what's all this value that was created by these companies that are shutting down? What are we doing about it? And so I was like, let's go found a patent purchase group. Right. And that was just, I had not done anything in patents, but I was like, it was obvious that there was an opportunity there. And then from there, sort of extended that to sort of a bankruptcy and restructuring group that essentially helps shut down in an orderly way companies, portfolio companies and suppliers. Well, that got me some visibility, but what changed my trajectory had nothing to do with my legal background, what I did at Intel. What changed my trajectory was that I eventually met someone, and it's this concept I call the power lifter, right? People use, sort of a similar concept called allies, but, they're allies and then they're lifters. And so I met a lifter who essentially I met because we had a shared love of cars. And I know this is kind of bizarre. So I always tell people career paths can be really bizarre, but we had a shared love of cars. And so we would spend all this time chatting about cars. And then he taught me about wine, and he was a little bit of a foodie. So he taught me about food. And we would talk about politics and economics and technology and the like. And I had no idea that I was on a 3.5-year interview. No idea. And so, I realized that I want to get into venture. I'm Black. I'm in the Valley. I don't have an MBA. I don't have a CFA. So I was like, look, I have to go do an MBA. And so I had two opportunities to do a full-time MBA or to do one where I was sort of working. And I realized that the opportunity cost of doing a full-time MBA was too high. So I decided to do a fully employed full-time MBA. And that was a big trade because eventually I kind of had, I lost sort of my marriage because of that. But it's a big trade. And so when you sort of look at some of these things and the career paths, people don't see those trades. But I eventually got offered, to become the technical advisor to the president of Intel Capital. First of all, president Intel, treasurer, and then president of Intel Capital. And it was from there that I really blossomed, right? Because I realized I had gotten to this point and I was putting the work in. I eventually, when I did the MBA during this period, but I put the work in. But that external interest for technology then came to bear because I was really going out there. This was sort of when the Web 2.0 thing was growing. I was going out there. I was talking to people, and I come back and I say, look, this is a huge opportunity for us. How do we think about it? And no one was thinking at that point in time, well, write $50 to $150 million checks in the biggest 10, 15 biggest global businesses. Certainly, no one was talking about it to us, but it was my idea. And I think, you fast forward. I went out. I chased Reed. I chased Mark. I chased Joe at Pandora. I chased everybody down, and it helped because I was sort of doing this venture thing, and I didn't look like anybody else. So it made me, I think, much more memorable than many of the people I was competing with, and that was dramatic. But I think a lot of that was the legal background certainly helped in terms of how you think about risk. But a lot of it was also put in the work. And so when I tell people that the trades you make for this, people call it a tax or whatever, but the trades you make are really, really difficult. You have to be 2 or 4 times as good. You have to be always on. It's incredibly corrosive, just being able to be present and memorable and distinctive and to be able to, win. And that's, that was sort of the start. And, I was able to sort of live Intel, go out, try to raise some money. That was also very difficult because, it just was, I didn't really look like a lot of people who were doing this. But I've always tried to, sort of make my own road. And, there's a well-known saying by Ty Sholarin, a Nigerian writer, may your road be rough. And in many ways, when you think about that, it's how you sort of build the resiliency and the tenacity and the conviction that is necessary to become, I think, a really good investor.
Amazing. I especially love what you said. I didn't know I was on a 3.5-year interview. That really captured a moment for a lot of people on the call. Spencer, over to you. Please share with us, how did you get into this role? How did you start? And we would love to hear your journey as well.
Yeah, so as an investor now, I started as an operator, and there are a lot of paths, as we just heard, there are a lot of paths to becoming a good and prolific investor. Mine was through the operator path. So I started as an investment banker, didn't like it, moved into private equity, didn't like it, decided I wanted to do startups. And after, almost 20 years at different startups, I decided that, being a full-time co-founder and CEO is, in a lot of ways, it's sort of a young person's game because the energy and focus and intensity that is required to be a full-time co-founding CEO is enormous. So I'm at the stage of my life where I want to be a coach, not a player, and coach multiple teams on different fields at the same time. And so for me, that's investing. Just listening to the career path we just heard about reminds me of one of my favorite expressions, which is, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So, people could certainly say that I've had luck in my career, and I certainly have, but I would prefer to think of it as the intersection of when I was prepared for something and an opportunity presented itself and I was able to seize it. You asked also about some of our investing themes or the types of things that I focus on. Since I left Zillow, or even back before I left Zillow, when I was angel investing before that, there have really been two major themes that I've been starting companies in and investing in. One is around democratization to access of things. So if you think about Hotwire, that was about democratization of access to cheap airline tickets, cheap hotel rooms, allowing more and more people to travel through online discounts. Zillow is about democratization of access to information so that people could have access to all this great data to help them make more informed decisions about real estate. My new startup, Picasso, is trying to democratize access to second home ownership so that it's not just something that the 1% can experience, but hopefully many, many more tens of millions of people can experience the benefits to them and their family of owning a second home. And so that's what Picasso is trying to do. The second major theme that I've invested in and started companies is unbundling and verticalization. So, there are a lot of great companies that are horizontal and huge, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, for example. I'm focused on the unbundling of social media and as it becomes verticalized. So, for example, Recon Food, which is a food-specific social network. You, of course, can share food on Instagram. Many people do. But if you want a dedicated space just for sharing recipes and food, Recon Food is for that. Q is a social app just for focused on streaming. So you could talk on Twitter about TV shows and movies that you're watching, but if you want to do that in a more narrow focused way to do that, then that's another of my startups, Q. .la, which is a news site that just focuses on LA tech. Again, there are plenty of national news sites that talk about tech. .la is just focused on LA tech. So, we saw this in classifieds where early internet, there was Craigslist, there was Yahoo that had all these horizontal things, and then it verticalized into, LinkedIn and Strava for running and Peloton for cycling and AllTrails for hiking. And, as things become massive and horizontal, they then tend to become verticalized. And so that's the other major theme that I'm investing in and incubating companies around.
Well received. Thank you so much for that. And so just diving into one of the most immediate questions that I know our audience has been asking is, you're on the other side of the table. You get pitches all the time. What are the top things that you're looking for when it comes to the company? Or better yet, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs as they capital raise for funding?
Shall I go? Or, okay. I'll jump in. So it's a great question, actually. A couple things. First of all, I'm looking for grit. The prior presentation where you showed your background and your experience of having grown up as a street vendor. I mean, oh my gosh, that's music to my ears as an investor, because you're like, wow, there's somebody who has faced rejection, faced people dismissing that person, and she has something to prove. Like you can tell when you just speak for 5 minutes or 30 seconds that you're here to show the world that you got something to prove, and you're not going to rest until you do that. So that grit is really important. Number two is founder product fit. So in other words, is the idea that this founder is promoting, is it something that they're really personally connected to? Were they put on earth to do this exact thing? There's no such thing as a great founder. In my opinion, there's really only a great founder for a specific idea. The third thing, and I wish that I had focused more on this earlier in my earlier angel investing. I've only more recently sort of realized how important this is. It's the person's ability to raise future capital. When you invest, especially at the early stage, you're making a bet that they're going to be able to keep raising enough money to extend the runway to have enough time to figure it out. And so that's very, very important, is assessing, do you think this person's going to be able to raise more money down the road? I guess fourth, I'd say total addressable market. So market size. I get a lot of pitches that are features, not companies. They're decent ideas, good ideas perhaps, but not big enough ideas to be venture funded and have venture type exits, which is really what you need. If you're investing at the early stage, you need to believe there's a 500 million, billion, multi-billion-dollar possible exit. Even though it might be unlikely, you have to believe that it could be possible. But if the idea's maximum exit value is 100 million, that may be great to bootstrap, and the founder should go pursue it, but it's not really venture fundable in my view.
Yeah, it goes as you elaborate on it. Can you also share some things that you've been trying to highlight that entrepreneurs take notice of when it comes to pitching for capital?
No, Spencer's been absolutely on point. For us, certainly based on our background, there's an intersection. I like to describe it: founders found, storytellers raise, right? And so how you blend those two things, I think, is going to be a very important marker for your ability to stay in the game. And staying in the game, having enough cash, having enough talent, having a decent enough product is pretty much everything you need to do, right? So getting that intersection is very right. When we're looking at founders, our sort of underpinning really is looking for founders that, first of all, are very driven to make innovation accessible, right? And so you tend to find that underrepresented founders tend to have that lens because a lot of it is just built on their own experiences. But making innovation accessible always sort of it draws the addressable market much closer, right? So you can sort of say, okay, this is a market. And what we've also found is that we always say this, we like secrets. We like founders that know secrets. We like markets that are secrets. We especially like open air secrets, the ones that you actually walk past every day, and you just have to have the lens for it, right? So that's a very important thing. So when you're talking to the founder, we always sort of want to know, what is the secret that you know about something or some market or some opportunity or some product that nobody else seems to, right? So there's that. The other thing that we like is founders who can attract who are sort of on a mission, because missionaries attract converts, right? And that's key. We've seen this. Sarah Menker at Grow Intelligence is an example of that, right? She's on an absolute mission, and what we've discovered even now, post as we gone through the pandemic, is that we're getting talent coming into that company that 2 or 3 years ago may not have done it. They're walking away from huge pay packages because they now are now dialed into the mission. So, we've seen sort of the A/B test on that, and that I think is going to be important. The third thing I think founders need to be clear about is not getting caught up in the complexity, because a lot of the markets that you're serving, we say this in emerging markets, when people are sort of describing a product, I'm like, it needs to have zero cognitive load. These markets are so difficult to live in every day. It's just chaos. So your product cannot come and layer on additional chaos, cannot come and layer on additional stress. It has to have zero cognitive load. So being able to sort of think through a product and say, look, what does this product need to do in its very simplest iteration, right? So you're not trying to sort of solve world hunger. There are other people doing that. Sarah's doing that at Grow. But, what does that actually mean? And being able to speak to that. And then I think the fourth is that as investors, we've done really well with not just underrepresented founders, not just Black and brown founders, but we've done really well with women founders. And what we found as well is that, and this is anecdotal, it may not be true across the board, but what we found as well is that making adjustments to the way we receive founders and with the way we talk to them is super important. A lot of the female founders we've seen, we don't actually want them to walk us through slides. What we found is being able to put them in a context where they're absolutely lighting up, because it's a discussion. It's not a pitch, right? And that's been sort of an important, sort of metaphor. And so I would always sort of tell entrepreneurs, if you can, especially if you're not that great a storyteller, just put the slides aside, send them in advance, whatever it is, but come with your best you. Come with the energy and the conviction and the goals and the ambitions and do that. And then the final point is a question we ask all the time, because I know underrepresented founders do this. Is this your best idea? And a lot of them will come pitch because they're like, well, I hear this is hot, so let me go sell this. And the truth is, we're seed and early stage investors. We are circling or skating to a market that's maybe 2 years in advance. So what's hot today is really not that interesting. So it's okay if you have, it's getting to where the puck is, sort of goal or product or objective. That's really sort of more important. So don't be afraid to share what's truly, what you truly want to build and how you truly want to serve and what you really want to do to make innovation accessible. It's fundamentally that. And, for us, we're always looking, and we carved up the world into sort of 4 quadrants, right? Organizing the offline, right? Because a lot of people sort of assume that digitization has hit most of the world. It's not actually true, not at real scale. So how do you organize the offline? We think that's a way to build a moat. How do you provide products that act as lubricants? Because in many of these markets, there's a ton of friction. So how you think about that? Are you providing products that generate lift? Not just I'm talking about actual lift, changing the career trajectory, the business trajectory, the life trajectory of the people that you serve. And then the final thing is that in many markets, people are fragile. Consumers, businesses, they're very, very fragile. So what are the things that we need to be doing, and what are the things you're trying to do to make them more anti-fragile, right? So that they can actually become stronger even within chaos or even within disorder. And we've used those quadrants as sort of a way to filter the types of investments we want to make. And that's been incredibly useful and helpful for us.
Christine, can I jump in with one piece of practical advice on this? So you're going to get a lot of no's. You pitch people like Agosa and me, like you're going to get a lot of no's. It's kind of a numbers game, especially at the early stage. The best piece of advice I can give is when you get a no, ask for more specific feedback about what might change that investor's mind. So, usually this occurs by email because investors hate to give no's verbally or in a meeting. So the investor will follow up by email. Oh, super excited for you, just not a good fit at this stage or whatever. At that point, instead of just saying, okay, thank you, say like, thanks so much for your time. I remember in our meeting you asked about, what type of feedback were we getting from the first couple enterprise sales customers that we had just brought on? What are the couple things that you might need to see down the road in order to change your mind about investing? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get that investor to put in writing, ideally, like I want to see you get to 2 million of MRR. I want to see you get to 5 customers. I want to see you recruit, chief product officer, because that's a weakness on the executive team. Have them tell you, like, what is it that would get them to change their mind? I have at least a dozen companies in my portfolio that were a no and became a yes 6, 12, 18 months later. And, once that investor puts in writing what it was, then you come back to them 6 months later and say, hey, guess what? I did what you set out, what you challenged me to do. And investors are looking for that track record of, you say something and you deliver, you say something and you deliver. One company, it was 2 years, more than 2 years, almost 3 years from that first pitch to when I finally invested, based on that kind of track record of them hitting deliverables that I set out for them, even though I wasn't an investor.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. The no's never stop. The no's never stop. So you've got to build sort of the suit of armor necessary to flick them off. But I think what I will add to what Spencer just said was that not every investor's advice is actually worth taking. To be perfectly candid, some of it's just nonsense, right? And so you've got to sort of trust your gut that when you go back to an investor that said no, there was something about the interaction that you really appreciated. And you're like, look, I would like to really hear from you. Like, what do you think? And many investors don't have the time, and they'll send you some stuff, traditional sort of basic stuff like, oh, I want to sit this one out, and not a fit for, the classic one-liner or whatever it is. But an investor that you've truly connected with will actually take the time to give you the feedback. And what's really important is that you internalize the feedback. You don't have to take all of it, but you sort of say, look, what am I missing in this interaction, and what can I learn and the like? Because a lot of entrepreneurs take the no's very personal, and at the end of the day, investors don't scale. That's the problem right now that I think entrepreneurs don't see. There's only so many investments we can make on an annual basis. There's only so many investments we can sort of be managing on a full-time basis over an investment period. So, every incremental investment that an investor makes, takes one other investment away, right? So, recognizing that and making sure that, not just your entrepreneur product fit or entrepreneur market fit, but it's entrepreneur investor fit, right? That's also a very important thing.
Thank you for that addition. So I know we're running on time, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys had the opportunity to answer this final question. We already talked about your backgrounds, and this second question yielded a lot of great strategies for entrepreneurs because I see the chat feed is going wild. The last question we wanted to share for each of you, and starting with Spencer, are there any initiatives, programs, or activities that you're doing currently right now to support entrepreneurs get access either to your capital fund or just in general to be more successful in raising capital? Spencer, starting with you.
I mean, they're not formal programs, but I mean, I view that one of the services that I provide as an early stage investor is helping these companies raise money down the road. So, almost every day I'm sitting with a seed or a Series A portfolio company and strategizing with them about how to raise the B, how to raise the C, who are good investors that would be a good fit, which introductions can I make? I mean, that's a huge part of the value that early stage investors provide. So it's not formalized, but that's basically my job.
And any final quick remarks before I pass it over to Agosa that you'd like to share? Because there were a lot of great insights from you, Spencer.
Thank you for having me. I talk about a lot of these themes. I write about them on my LinkedIn blog and elsewhere and on social media. So, and my podcast actually explores a lot of these. I have a podcast called Office Hours where I interview other founders and CEOs about a lot of these similar topics about scaling and fundraising and DEI and other topics of interest to me. So check out my podcast if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Agosa, over to you. Same question.
Oh, great. Yeah. So we do office hours. So I think a few things. One is that we are very, very, very serious about not requiring warm introductions, right? So, I think that's one important thing that most entrepreneurs really struggle with, right? Because people say, take, for instance, just say, oh, you can find someone who knows me through LinkedIn or whatever it is. And, and that's great. We have quite a few companies in our portfolio that came in through the website. Right. And, if you take the time to put in the information we need from you so we can evaluate what you're doing, we'll take a really serious look at that. So that's, it's not a program, but it's an open door. The second thing that we do is we do office hours, like physical office hours. And that's also, I think, an important thing. Then the one thing we started doing sort of the last year was having sort of, clubhouse discussions, and we've become, I think, a little bit more open. So for instance, the last one we did was on our investment strategy in InsurTech, right? And so we're probably going to do those types of conversations where people are sort of welcome. We'll show you what our internal workings, so to speak, and then hear from entrepreneurs who are working in those spaces. But accessibility, I think, is a very important aspect of what we do, and we'll continue to do that as best as we can.
Well, we'll see. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us at the Global Investment Summit and giving your insights. Obviously, you see the chat feed is going wild, so we will be sharing your LinkedIn information so people can follow you on LinkedIn. And Spencer, thank you for sharing your podcast. We'll share information about that as well. It was a pleasure to have both of you with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is